typical.
They still associate us with the sheep, yeah.
All right, so we're at 1:30, everybody, so we'll go ahead and get started. Can somebody who's on the meeting online, can you kind of confirm that you can hear us and see us?
I can hear you.
Okay, thanks, David. All right, so I'm Wim Matthews with the Oregon Department of Agriculture, and we're here in Salem for the in-person part and folks scattered around the state. For the virtual attendance for the CAFO Advisory Committee. This group meets 3 times a year, and this is our mid-year meeting in July. So I think we'll go around and we have some people kind of coming in and getting settled. And we'll go around in the room here and have some introductions. And we'll start with Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Sweeney. I am the office specialist for the CAFO program.
Hi, I'm Katie Carney. I'm the new kind of hybrid position, part-time inspector, part-time helping out with permit writing and administrative stuff.
Hi, I'm Carol Lorenzen, and I'm the Department Head of Animal and Rangeland Sciences at Oregon State University, and super happy to be at my first meeting since I started in 2020.
Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Denny. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association.
Hi, I'm Lauren Poor. I am the Vice President of Government and Legal Affairs for the Oregon Farm Bureau. Jennifer Cruikshank, Field Extension Faculty with Oregon State University in Dairy Management.
Tammy Kerr, Executive Director, Oregon Dairy Farmers Association.
I'm Tom Thompson, Northwest Ag Consulting.
Christy Caldwell, CAFO Program Analyst.
All right, I'm going to take a stab at folks on the phone for introductions, and I'll go down the list as they appear here, right? Let's see, Ben Cron.
Ben Cron, CAFO Inspector.
David. Buddy Muir.
Biosphere enhancement. We've got safe manure additive.
All right, thanks, Megan.
Hi, everyone. Megan Schnard with the Oregon Seed Council.
Dan.
Dan Jarman, Crosswater Strategies.
Hi, Dan. Lily, did I get that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Hi, Lily DePaula here.
Mike. Mike Freeze, want to introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, Wim. Mike Freeze, and I'm with Romaine Freeze and representing Beef Northwest and 3 Mile Canyon Farms.
Okay, thanks. So it's like an email address, all@animal is the part that I can see here.
Oh, it's Allie.
Oh, Allie. Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, actually, it's Tim, her husband.
Oh, okay.
So no worries. Tim Christopher, Executive Director at Northwest Chicken Council.
Great. Sarah? Rebecca?
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Rebecca Bodner. I am with Oregon DEQ, and I'm the new Permitting and Program Development Manager.
Right, and Rebecca and I are going to be good buddies over the next several months.
I might be hiring someone to help you out.
That would be great. All right, we had one other person join us in the room. Do you want to introduce yourself, Al?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alice Morrison. I'm a co-executive director of Friends of Family Farmers. Thanks for having me.
Sure, thank you. All right, hey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Did you direct that as a particular person, Wim?
Brian Poswitz.
Oh yeah, hi. Sorry, I didn't quite hear who you were referring to there. Hi everybody, I'm Brian Poswitz, and I am here on behalf of Water Watch of Oregon and Humane Voters Oregon. And happy to be here. Looking forward to.
All right. Thank you.
David May, I think, is able to introduce himself now.
Yep. Skyline Farms. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's David Mays,
Um,
Skyline Farms.
Perfect. And you're sitting in for Mark?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else that's not introduced themselves want to? Hey, Tammy, thanks for coming. You want to move up? We'll find a place to get you in there. There we go. All right, so we have a pretty full agenda, so one last chance for introductions on the phone. All right, not hearing any, so we do record these meetings and that's how we keep the minutes. And that way, if any of the members or attendees want to relive part of the meeting, you can just pull the digital recording up. Amanda will post that probably about 10 days after the meeting online, and I think make that available that way. I don't know if anybody had a chance to review the last meeting minutes, and if you have any additions, changes, or omissions that we left out, I would entertain those. All right, not hearing any, we will let them stand as posted and come up with another set for this meeting. The 140 item is what we're on now, which is kind of a small dairy outreach update. And if you recall, in April, I did some slides talking about outreach to raw milk and small dairies. And there's been an update that I wanted to present. I didn't make any slides for this activity. It's just more of a verbal update. And that is that we continue to outreach to folks in those classes around the state. And I went to a meeting, was invited to a meeting in Benville to talk to a raw milk group. And their speakers are all cows that they milk. And so that was I thought that was a great meeting, tons of questions and a good interchange. We have permitted a couple facilities, right? One facility was a grade A dairy historically, right? And the owner had leased it out to another operator. The other operator stopped operating and ceased the grade A side, right? And the owner decided to take it back over and milk cows in a raw milk outfit there. And so that facility has been permitted before with us for longstanding. It now has come under a new permit, right? Because the old permit lapsed. The transfer didn't happen timely, right? So the permit lapsed and the new operators come along. And we've had a couple of inquiries, right, from sheep and goat facilities, right? And I think the goat facility up around the Portland metro area is moving forward with that program. The other update on that is that we did remove, right, reconsider to remove one part of the activity for the small and raw milk dairy outreach. Piece is that in original slide chat, we talked about being able to offer a waiver, right, from the permit requirement, and we've removed that option. Right. And so there are circumstances where a small facility, right, wouldn't need a CAFO permit as long as their waste system is approved by another entity, that has authority to approve it. So the example is like a septic system. Right, a septic system is an approved waste treatment facility, right, approved by the county health department or DEQ directly. And if a facility had that, right, ODA would not require a CAFO permit over and on top of that. But just to kind of reiterate, so the permit is an environmental permit, right? Its purpose is to manage environmental activities right on farms of any size and species. And so we're not going to look at what the end result of the product created on any one farm is to make an environmental permit decision. So given that the ability for a waiver is we've taken that away. And so we continue to kind of interface with other folks, throughout the rest of this year and, get information as it comes in and see kind of where we're going to go. When we talk about Senate Bill 85 implementation, right, any of these facilities, right, will be part of that conversation. Whether they're, thinking about making an application or planning, to do something, because Senate Bill 85 implementation, right, some of its implementation points are to facilities regardless of size. Right, so we will need to think about that right as we implement 85. And see what activity right it has over these other size facilities. So that's the update. Any questions on that?
It just goes down to one animal then still, or?
Right, so the state definition, essentially says animals confined. And then so, one or more. So there's our state doesn't limit it as far as the number of animals. Right, now we use the number of animals to determine the size of the permit that we want to issue, but that's the only reason we use that. Yeah, so if you confine or have a waste system or discharge from a livestock operation, right, any one of those three things by themselves could require a permit.
Have there been any other discussion about the definition of confinement that we're using for this small dairy expansion? Because I know we've talked about this before, but I know we're focused on dairy at the moment, but that definition of confinement that we're, kind of reinterpreting for this program could be applied in theory to, in my mind, any operation raising livestock in Oregon, because we all use sacrifice grounds, people put their cows in pole barns, like a backyard chicken farmer puts their animals in the coop to avoid predation.
Right.
Have we talked about where the lines are there?
We did at the Big Benville meeting, we did talk about that at length, and so it all depends on the specifics of the site, right? And so the reason dairies are so unique is because they have a wet waste system, right? And so of the three things, you only need one of the three to require a permit. Right, if you're discharging and you won't stop, you need a permit and then we'll make you stop. If you have a wet waste system, you need a permit just for the system. It's not for the number of animals or how you confine. It's you have a wet waste system. And then there's the confinement piece, right? If you confine. So if we looked at 3 chickens in a backyard chicken coop, let's use that example. Right, so the chickens are confined every night. They have to be, otherwise they're not alive the next morning, right? They're either gone or dead. So that's confinement, right? They are a dry waste system. The chickens aren't being milked. There's no liquid. The excreta is mainly solid, right? On straw bedding or sawdust bedding inside the chicken coop, right? So that's how that manure is handled. And the assumption is they're not discharging. Given those 3 things in that scenario, we'd say, yes, you're a CAFO, but you don't need a permit. And so remember, Oregon's confined definition, right, defines these facilities that are CAFOs. But there are thousands that don't need permits, right? One horse or a kid's 4-H calf project in the backyard. We go down through that same checklist. Do they have a liquid waste system? The calf and the horse? No. Are they discharging? Hopefully not, but if we had to confirm, we could. And then third, do they have that the liquid waste system, right? They are confining, right? But we're saying, by policy, we've said, no, we're not going to permit those facilities. So dry waste facilities dependent on species, we permit them if they meet the medium federal definition of size. So a dry waste only facility, when they're medium, we permit them. And so a beef cattle operation, we don't require small beef working corrals and feedlots. We permit if they're less than 300 head and they're not discharging. And they don't have some liquid system, right? A feedlot like that on the west side would likely need a stormwater retention pond, which would be a liquid system which would bring them in. So the way that we have to do it is go down through the specifics of each facility and then look at how we make a decision to permit. So I don't think we've looked at making any changes to definition. It's just mainly what's the characteristics of each operation, the operational characteristic, right? In some circumstances, that's the location too, right? So a small feedlot may need a permit on the west side because of stormwater precept and control they need to do versus that same size on the east side would not need a permit.
And I'm sorry to ask so many questions.
No worries.
But so is that distinction between liquid waste and dry waste facilities that you're talking about, is that in rules anywhere, or is that just a policy of the program?
So it's defined in the permits, right? Yeah, liquid and dry systems and waste. Yeah, I don't believe it's in any of the rules or statutes.
But just so if you reach one if the only criteria that you fulfill for the big three of needing a
Right.
CAFO permit is that confinement question,
Right.
then you wouldn't need a permit until you reach that medium size.
Till you reach the medium size for that species.
Right.
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and the small dairies have to be in this category where they're requiring permits for a 2-cow operation because of the liquid waste.
Correct.
And so if there was no wash water system at all for the milking, whatever it was, that would be considered a dry waste system.
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm clear.
Yeah,
And I would say we're not reinterpreting definitions. We're more equitably applying the definition to any dairy that has a wet waste system. That's always been the standard that we've had. We just haven't really looked at smaller operations in the past. So it's not new, it's not changing anything. It's just we're actually looking at like, oh, these facilities do apply or fit that definition, and we should reach out and address it, and let's have some conversations and education and move down where we need to go.
I think our farmers would say that it is a new interpretation, but I understand where you're coming from.
Sarah King has a question.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Wim, thanks. Nice to see you again. Thanks so much for coming to McMinnville for us a few weeks ago. It was nice to interact with you and get some more understanding for those dairies that were in the room. I think we talked about this a little bit, but my question is really the wet waste system versus dry waste system. I was talking to a few horse facilities the other day, and they very much have a wet waste system when we look at their wash rack area. So they're washing a lot of horses. And I know I have spent my time in a horse barn over the years and have washed many myself and been the unfortunate lucky person that gets to clean out the wash rack holding tank. So my question is, are we looking at also applying this program for those horse facilities? I had some concern coming from the group of individuals I was talking with about that, because they're operating a fairly large number of horses in their barns. But of course, they're meeting a definition of confinement because those horses are held in stall and not on any sort of pasture. So my just asking is there an application for this program for those facilities?
So, sir, yeah, thanks for providing that question. Yeah, and that information that I heard at the McMinnville meeting. And so the way you describe this facility, right, we would say that needs a pure permit, right, because it's got a tank and it's got that wash activity, right? So if we go down the list right on that facility, we would say, yeah, that facility, we need to talk about a permit. And then what are they doing with the wastewater after it exits the tank, right? Is it going into a leach field, or is it being land applied, or is it just running down the ditch? And so, yes, I could definitely see that we would, need to put together some kind of outreach to that group too, to say, it's kind of the old fashioned horse barn is the 1 or 2 horses in the stall with dry waste, right? So they've not had liquid waste historically, other than this washing activity. Knowing horses, right, we did look at all the fairgrounds early on in this program. We looked at every state fairground. And we did permit 2 because of horse wash racks, right? And they had 300 or 400 head of horses on site for 30 or 40 days of the year, cumulatively, not all contiguously. But they had a wash rack that had 40 spigots on it, right? And they were running it into a tank and sprinkling it out of their field. So that was more CAFO-esque, right, than a single owner. We do permit a few horse facilities already. I think we permit 5 in the state, but it's mainly because of the number of horses, right? There are over 150 horses, right? So 150 plus a dry system, put them into the permit that way. But yes, given these comments, we would definitely look at doing outreach to this group of folks that may need that coverage for those activities.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I ask one more question if it's allowed?
Sure.
Thank you. So I have a friend that has a goat that she was milking in her home, and it's just for her own family use. She was concerned because she takes a single 1 gallon milk pail to milk her goat with, and she pours the milk in her kitchen and then washes that 1 gallon bucket in her kitchen sink and runs it through her dishwasher. So my question is, she's meeting the definition according to the wet waste system potentially, because she's washing that bottle and that bucket in her home kitchen. But she's also worried about the confinement piece then, because her goat is out eating the blackberries in her pasture for her. So she was like, do I need to apply? Do I need to inquire? And I said, probably, given the definition that's outlined, but I didn't know how to answer that question clearly, and I certainly don't need to be the authority. I know you all are doing that, but if I am talking to individuals, do I encourage them to apply in that case, or what's the recommendation there?
So I guess answer the second part of that first. Yeah, you're definitely welcome to send anybody to us with questions, right? We're not gonna require an application just to have a conversation. And it can be anonymous, or not, to get questions like these answered. So I just invite folks that have those to get that out. And then the piece of this, right? So the confinement would be an issue on this example that you talked about with the goat, if the entity that permits the waste system, right, is okay with that stuff going in there. And so again, would be, if it ends up being a sewer, right, it's a sewer district, and that's a question for them. And then you'd be fine with that, and if they are, then we're good. CAFO's good, right? CAFO's not gonna require a permit on top of another permitted waste system. And then the second option there, I guess, would be if it's a septic and a leach field, will that authority be okay with that? And again, describing the amount of material what it is and the amount of material that it is, that authority may say, yeah, we're fine with that.
If you would need to something. Things count for the county health and it's the agency have to weigh in.
Correct. Right. The waste system is permitted by another state agency, right, that would manage that system. Right, it's designed, all the septics are designed. And the leach field is sized and designed to manage that waste without surface groundwater contamination. Which that's what the CAFO permit does, right? How do you manage those materials so you don't pollute surface groundwater? And so if there's another system in place permitted by somebody else, then we don't, the zoo is full, right? All of their liquid goes to the city of Portland sewer, right? We went out, they applied, we went up and took a look, right? And all their liquid goes into the sewer, right? And they've got a special pretreatment agreement with the sewer district, right? And they've got a whole list of steps they go through with that. We walked through the whole system. All their stormwater, when they wash down the elephant pens and any cages, and all the solids get exported in dumpsters to composters, right? So they can find a ton of animals 365 days a year. They have a wet waste system, and all their wet waste is handled by a permitted entity that is not CAFO. And so they did not apply. Same way with the Portland racetrack, the horse track, that thing. And so, sorry, this isn't more simplistic, right? To try to just, every situation isn't the same, and you have to kind of dissect it by asking these questions to figure out, okay, how do you do this? How do you do that? How much of this do you have, and where does it go? And you put all those things together and weave it through and come up with the answer. All right.
Thanks, question.
Sure.
Could you just clarify again on the impetus at this point in time in implementing this program, given that the CAFO program is longstanding, why this is more in 2023 and I see being implemented at this point? What was impetus, or what's the?
Right. So, basically, we've had facilities of all sizes, right? And if you look at dairies, right, the smallest permitted dairy we've ever had historically here is 3 cows. And so we looked at that facility. They've since sold the facility, right? But we thought it was time to do outreach to these facilities, and there are more of them around. And when we looked, we found quite a few small dairies advertising on Craigslist. And so, given the fact that there are dairies out there, and our belief is dairies need CAFO permits, we started the program to look at that. Kind of before you came in, Christine, one of the questions was, okay, all right, you heard it. All right, I won't go there. Chad, anything to add on?
No, I think it's just equitably applying our current statutes across everybody who it applies to. And so just making sure that we as a state agency are fulfilling our duty in that respect, so.
Right, any other questions on? All right, not hearing anybody, any hands raised there? No, I don't see any. Okay. Moving on to the 150 item, which is Senate Bill 85 implementation. So we have some slides. I know, do you want to kick it off a little starter or go through the slides first and finish with that? How do you want to?
We can kind of, either way, I guess.
You want to pull
So I assume everyone at the table on the meeting followed Senate Bill 85 to the legislative session. You're somewhat familiar with what's in it. It's large. There's lots of moving pieces. Some of them apply to ODA, some of them apply to DEQ, some apply to WRT, or there's a mix across the board. I think given the complexities and the number of moving pieces within 85, the agencies that are involved are coordinating on what that means and looks like for implementation in terms of a time period, and any temporary pause or hold that we'll have to do on applications that we receive in the meantime to make sure that we are complying with 85 as we move forward, given that I don't think it's signed yet, but it will be soon. So just recognizing that there's going to be a lot of work to actually get all of the pieces in place so that we can start to issue permits under the new rules as dictated by 85. So just with a caveat there that there may be a little bit of a lag time in how we're able to process applications.
All right, so I put together a handful of slides to try to start unpacking, right, how the agencies, what's in 85. And so today I'm really going to kind of focus on what's in it. And then we'll talk about how the agencies needs to implement all these different parts of it. Right, and the ultimate implementation piece that this group can have a role in helping us is we're going to need to stand up a rules advisory committee, right, to implement all of 85. There may be two different rules committees or two that can serve, one that can serve in two different roles. We have to develop a new permit. We also have to implement all these other things that affect our current permitting system. So the last slide is an invite for any and all of you who want to be part of a rules advisory committee to raise your hands. And that rules advisory committee is also going to include some invitees from outside this group too, right? We need OSU scientists and folks. We need NRCS folks. We need water resources folks, because we're going to talk about water quantity. Other agencies will be doing rulemaking, right? That we will likely be partnering in on the water quantity side. So focusing on the fact that CAFO is a water quality permit and we don't have water quantity authority in our agency, right? And can't put it in our permit. I'm going to try to talk about everything. And then we'll see and just shoot out questions as they come along here.
But I think the other piece to that is not only like, do you want to participate in that, but like, what other folks do you see that should be at the table that don't normally attend the CAC meeting? For example, part of 85 is specific to wellness within the state. I don't think we have anybody that regularly sits on the CAC that's actually a producer of Guam. So like that would be somebody that we could seek out. So if you know things like that, or if you see a perspective that we can should we have these, certainly can share that.
No worries. So one thing 85 did is it had some new definitions, right? And these are the ones that we're focusing on right now. Some of the most important because they all have CAFO in them. Right, defining what an expanding CAFO is, right? The existing permits, both general and individual of all types and sizes, already have an expansion definition within the permit. This is different, right? Current definition says if you expand more than 25 animals at 10%, whichever is greater, you have to come back to the agency with a new plan. might take you to a new tier, you have to be publicly noticed, and there's other activities you have to do. This creates expansion of 20% when you're at the largest tier and you expand more than 20% of your permitted number. That creates this definition of expanding CAFO and expanding large CAFO. Right, so that's new. Those are new definitions we'll have to implement in the both the general and individual CAFO permits that we issue. Then there's new CAFO, right? There's not ever been a definition of new CAFO in any of our statutes or rules or DEQs, right? There's been tons of definitions about CAFO, but not new CAFO. So new is a facility, right, seeking a permit under 050 to operate on a parcel which no CAFO has previously operated, right? And I think the way we're going to interpret that, no permitted CAFO is you just talked earlier about the fact that there's thousands of CAFOs in Oregon that aren't permitted, right? That's not going to qualify here. I don't believe. I believe it will probably modify it by saying permitted CAFO, right? So the question we'll ask an applicant is, what's the history of this land parcel? We'll look at our records to see if we've ever issued a permit for that parcel, or it's been included in somebody else's permit at one time. And if the answer is no, right, that they're a brand new facility, right? And that triggers requirements that are different from existing facilities. And then new large, if you're at the biggest size of facilities, again, the same definition, it's just a large CAFO that has that site. All right, we'll go to the next one. Can you check on see if everybody raises their hand? I guess
Yeah, I'm watching.
All right. So now we're kind of going past definitions right into activity. So 85 requires the agency to do a lot of different things to implement this legislation. And I'm listing them all as activities that we have to undertake and undertake with other agencies to get this put together. And so one of the things that it does is to say the agency, ODA and or DEQ, because we're joined together in the permit program, right? Upon signing of this, right, we can't issue anything other than an individual permit to a new large CAFO in a groundwater management area, right? So they've got to be new and large. They've got to be located in a groundwater management area. That's that 4a. And they have to apply manure, litter, wastewater that they produce to land. Right, so a CAFO that does not land apply, it does not meet this definition. And so a poultry facility, right, if they're going to export 100% of their manure, they would not meet this definition, even if they're new and large. And so again, it's kind of like
they still need a permit.
They still need a permit.
Required to give them an individual.
Correct.
Yes.
They would qualify for a general permit rather than an individual. Right, so anybody new and large coming along with these criteria and it's kind of been a policy position for us anyway, but we'll implement that in all of the permits will say that. Next slide.
Just a quick question. So that's both the facility is located in Guam and the planning that if they're located outside of Guam, they're planning.
We'll get to that. In the Guam, we'll get to that. Yeah, there's another construct for that. Yeah. So the next activity that is brand new, it's called a pre-application preliminary consultation. And what that means, and remember back in the definitions, we have a new large CAFO definition and we have an expanding large CAFO definition. If either of those groups of facilities come to the agency either for a permit, if they're new large, they're coming for a permit registration or a permit itself, if they're individual permitting, or if they're expanding, they're coming to the agency because they have to present a new nutrient management plan. And if they expand more than 20%, they have to be noticed to the public. Right, so that's how the agency finds out about these. Once we find out, I mean, ideally this would happen before the agency even finds out. I don't know how that's good. You know, the cart before the horse thing, right? They're probably going to call us and say, hey, I'm ready to talk to you about getting a CAFO permit. And then we will say, hey, let's get together with all the agencies that are involved in this and have a pre-application consultation meeting. Right, so our agency has to, well, the applicant shall, right? So they have to be in some applicant status, right? They have to request it. It's a requirement, part of their application process. Then the agencies have to set it up, right? So it's likely gonna be ODA setting up that consultation. And we have to participate in it. We're gonna notify, right, any federally recognized tribe and consult with the governing body. We already do that with every public notice that we send out. We have a tribal liaison position in our agency. And she notified any public notice with CAFO, any permitting activity already gets noticed that way. So that system's in place.
Well, it essentially moves the notification from the public comment notification that goes out
Earlier.
to earlier.
Yeah.
Like when we don't even have a complete application likely at this point. So it's like, hey, somebody's interested in CAFO, you know, so they're at least aware.
Right. And then this consultation has to include the applicant, right? Somebody from DEQ, somebody from ODA, somebody from Water Resources Department and other relevant agencies, and occur within 45 days of the request from the applicant. Right, so there's a timeline that's attached to this. ODA/DEQ will likely set it up. Attendance is required. I mean, that's how we're going to advertise it, right? There's attendance is required. And at that point, I believe, you know, a brief agenda of something like this would likely be the applicant talks to the agencies about what they are proposing to do. And then the agencies take turns saying, okay, if you want to do that, the ODA and DEQ and the CAFO program are going to require you to apply for a new individual NPDES CAFO permit or new individual WPSDF permit. DEQ is going to say, well, how big is your construction site? 20 acres. You need a 1,200 seat construction stormwater permit. Are you going to have a scale? If you're a feedlot, are you going to have scales to weigh trucks? Yes, you need a scale permit from ODA. Are you going to be a dairy? Yes. You need a grade A license from ODA. Right? Are you going to have some kind of processing and or slaughtering activity on the farm? Right? If the answer is yes, I'm going to process chickens. Can that processing, waste material, solid and liquid waste from that processing be covered under a CAFO permit, or would we need another DEQ permit for that activity? Where are you going to get your water, right? We'll talk about water supply plan later, but that's a big part of 85 is water quantity. And so the question in this is going to be maybe not so much about how much water they're going to use, about where are you going to get it and where are you located, because that's super critical on water availability and what kind of system I need to put together to get water. So again, this is a brand new activity. It's what adds another step to the application process. I think one thing I would say about this, these are not open public meetings, right? This is a consult with the agencies. If a application results from this activity, right, that application is public. Everything after that point's public. But this is not.
Would there be a multi-step process where you come on, you start one, and then the agencies have questions, you come back to step two and say, I address those?
It'll likely be a conversation back and forth, right? Because maybe at that initial meeting, the applicant doesn't have all the information they were asking them for. And so like they'll go back, they'll re-engage us before we actually get a complete application. Okay. It's kind of like a gut check, the way I look at it. It's a gut check for the applicant. Like, can I really pull this off? Do I have everything that I need? Do I understand all of the regulations that I'm going to be required to comply with? Like, kind of give them this. And then maybe they decide, nope, like this is not for me. Or I need to scale my operation because I don't have water and I have to fit within that 12,000 gallons a day, which is whatever.
Yeah. The other thing, even though these agencies, there's no federal counterpart agencies other than tribes or, different nations at this meeting, right? But I can also see there are rare occasions where CAFO activities like triggers a Corps of Engineers permit, right? A federal agency permit. And so the state agencies are going to have to take notes, right? And if it triggers a relationship that they have with a federal agency, they'll have to bring that agency on board, right, to get the information to the potential applicant. So this might be a one and done. This might be a one and then recurring activity for some time while they decide to gather information, get response from the agencies. The only timeline is that initial meeting has to be 45 days after it's requested. And then I think it could go a kind of an unmetered amount of time after that while these other background things run. And it could result in no application at all to the agency. That could be it. Or it could result in an application, right? Those are the two outcomes. But hopefully the applicant is more well-versed on what they need to meet all the agency requirements. And can ask questions and how to get their stuff together, make those decisions like that. Just go ahead. All right, next one. So neighbor notice is one of the new activities, right? And this is not something that ODA has to do, right? This is the applicant is responsible 100% for doing this activity. ODA's role is to make sure the applicant's aware, right, in the pre-app meeting, in the application process, that this is one of the things you need to do. And we likely will set a checklist for our public noticing saying, when we issue public notice, right, we'll provide a copy of that to the applicant and they will have to take it from there to, to satisfy this. But I expect that we would probably not hold a public hearing if we talked to the applicant and they said, hey, we didn't send this out. Right, because that's part of noticing. So the applicant has to notify parcel owners, right, within a half a mile of the site. And like I said, I expect that we would prepare a public notice on ODA and letterhead, right? We'd share it with the applicant and then they would share it onto this list of people that they all have to generate and they will have to do the delivery. Email, mail, whatever, knock on their doors, however they want to do the delivery. It's for new large CAFOs, right? It's not for all new CAFOs, it's just new large. You have to meet that definition before this requirement comes along. So this whole thing will be, we already have a spider web about how do you get to the middle of a spider web when you start on the outside? You're gonna go like this. This is gonna add more of that, right? Because are you new large? Okay, this is one of your requirements. If you're a new small, this is not one of your requirements. And then we can't consider a neighbor's person's lack of receipt, right, when we decide to make a permit decision, right, after the public notice is over. If somebody says, hey, I didn't get notice, that's not something we can take into account and say, oh, well, we have to start noticing all over again. So that's all brand new, and it is very similar to land use. Every land use decision has to be noticed this way. And each land use entity has a distance from the activity that you have to notice those folks in. So you get a map of the parcels from the assessor, and you can get their names and address of the taxpayers, right, that own those parcels, and you can use that to generate your list and send that out.
And those often require posting too on site, and this doesn't require posting. This is just simply a notification required.
I totally understand that like one person saying, well, I didn't hear about it is not grounds for reconsidering, but if all the neighbors come forward and say, I didn't hear about it, is that a factor at all? If there's evidence that no noticing was done?
Question.
Because I understand like one or two people, like they didn't check their email, that happened.
Yeah.
But if it's everybody.
And I think that's something that we can take up in the rulemaking process. Like, what do we need to require from the applicant as proof that they did it, right? Like, is that an attestation form? Do they need to show us, also copy us on whatever was sent out? Like, I don't know, right? Like, but I think that we could spell that out through the rulemaking process.
Yes, I think there's many ways to do it.
Yeah.
But it says buy upon mail, so it will be a physical post office.
Yeah.
That could be,
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Depending how many parcels there are.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna, right, depending on where you're at, how many parcels.
And you have to notify the landowner of the parcel and who's living in the parcel. So while we have some cases where the person living on it doesn't own it.
I'm gonna say owning, right? I think the way we would look at, right, who pays the taxes, right? So if it's a landlord tenant situation, I guess our expectation would be that the landlord would inform the tenant that if you want to make a comment, right? Here's the way to do it. Yeah. But I think this is modeled after land use, right? So I think what we'll do in rulemaking is we'll get somebody who knows land use. What's the requirement, right? How is it written and described? And then how can we require? All right, next slide. All right, so this in 85, comes up as a new activity. I think historically we've been doing this, calling it two-step construction. And the new way we're going to refer to it is construction and pre-population inspections. And so it's required for two unique groups of CAFOs, right? New ones, not new to large, just new. So new, small, medium, and large. And expanding, and expanding is a new definition. The ones that are doing 20%. So those groups of facilities, for a new facility, right, we're expanding we are inspecting the infrastructure that they're building because there's nothing there right now, right? It's a bare piece of ground or it's an old farm site that was flattened out and is bare. Then we're inspecting all the infrastructure that's CAFO related, right? So any waste system that can construct, waste transfer system, storage, treatment application, right? We're not inspecting the driveway. If they build a house for human habitat, we're not inspecting that. So it's just those pieces that are part of the CAFO waste system. On an expanding facility, right, we're not inspecting the stuff that's already there. We're inspecting the new construction that would be part of the expansion. So an existing.
Clarify that animals could be, otherwise they'd say the old large couldn't have animals there, so you need to have new animals or something like that.
Well, it does say that because it says can't bring animals to a new facility or the newly constructed facilities on an expanded. Right, so the existing facilities can still be populated and operated while we do this work. If you build a new parlor, right, you can't put cows through that new parlor until we inspect that parlor. But you can use your old parlor all the way up to the day we say you can use it now. And you can house animals in the old barns, right, if you build new ones. And a lot of expansions are the existing systems continue to operate. Maybe they're repurposed what they operate, and the new system takes over. Sometimes with expanded animal numbers, sometimes not. Both of those, right? So we inspect once every 10 months. And so if somebody was expanding and they didn't tell us, we would hopefully see it when we were there, especially if they're pouring concrete, right? If the building's torn down. And we have had that happen before. Or they would just come in and say, hey, look, the way it happens now usually is they tell us, I'm thinking about an expansion. What would I need to do in the permit to make that work? And then we have the opportunity to explain to them, okay, we got to update your nutrient management plan. We need engineering because you're building a system that has an engineered staff. When we approve its construction, we do that in writing. And then we set up the inspections right in that written document. Hey, we'll be out while you're building to look at it. And you can't use it until we give you the final okay. And this came out of the inspections that municipalities do for home constructions. Right, you get a plumbing inspection, right? And you can't use your plumbing until the plumbing inspector comes out and says, yeah, you're good. Electrical inspections, right? Structural inspection. They have a whole list of different parts of the house that get inspected right before the house can be occupied and be used. This is the same thing, confirmation. So we have to inspect it, right? Sometimes once, sometimes maybe 4 or 5 times, depending on the scope of the activity. And then we'll give them this final confirmation, right? Hey, it complies with what you gave us and we approved. If they said we're going to build a 50 by 50 building to store chicken litter in, and we show up and it's 40 by 40, it doesn't conform. Right? Because the size, right, denotes storage time period, and they made a smaller facility, right? Well, I didn't have the money, right? I made it smaller. Well, that's not going to work.
And we have to adjust other parts of your plan.
We wouldn't approve that, and they would have to go back and adjust other parts of their plan to make that work. It's really hard to add on 10 feet right after you've already built it. So that's why talking to us early and getting the expectations down is going to be important. Yep, sure.
So in the case of like folks who maybe are in the small dairy outreach category and are existing farms who did not realize they needed a permit and they already they're not building anything new, but they're new permit applications and they already have animals.
Right.
Maybe this is something we'll do in rulemaking, but how do you anticipate that being handled in this part?
So my anticipation, right, that it really wouldn't be this kind of a setup. It would be the activity about when we're reviewing the application, right, just confirming that those things are there and operable, right? So it's more of a confirmation they're already there. Right, and historically, use Tillamook as an example, right? All the dairies in Tillamook existed before the Clean Water Act ever existed, right? Before any permitting existed. And so there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that was built there before any of these rules came along. And so I guess I would just, use the euphemism that they were generally grandfathered in, right? If there was a lagoon that was there, I mean, the agency didn't go back and say, hey, I need to see the engineering on that lagoon. Some of them had it, some of them didn't. Right, if there was a barn with a concrete floor, right, that kept manure separated from groundwater, as long as the concrete looked to be intact and functional, right, we didn't ask for, doesn't have rebar in the concrete, right, which we would ask for in new construction, but for existing, that's how we look at it.
Again, I think you go back to like, if you want to use housing as an example, right, like as building codes change, older houses aren't required to come up to the current code unless a change to the structure is made, and then the same would apply to like the CAFO. If you're making significant modifications to a lagoon or whatever, like, all right, now you have to provide some stamp, whatever, to meet the standard and making sure that the line protection, whatever the requirement is.
Can I ask the question, in addition to that, if you are, let's say, one of these sports facilities that we were talking about earlier, and they're using a ton of wash water, and you come out and you find them not to be in compliance. Is there a system of citation? Like, so now you have a new CAFO, but they're not in compliance, and they need a system that they're operating how it's important.
So historically, we've not, when we've rolled up on that kind of facility, like we have not started with any kind of penalty. Unless, right, and I can't remember in my tenure, we've never done this, but in our policy, if we roll up and there's a pipe directly to the river and it is egregious, super egregious activity, right, we might start with a penalty there. But in my career, we've not ever found that. Right, we found discharge, hey, it's kind of steeping down the hill and it's not the best activity, but what we'll do is we'll inform them, yes, you need a permit, and if they get on track and start the application process and move through that, and then remedy the situation while they're getting a permit, then we're fine. And we have had some situations where it was owner-tenant relationship was to the point where the owner says, we're getting a permit, right? We're getting a permit because I'm demanding it. I'm the landlord, I'm demanding a permit, right? And then the permittee got a permit with the landowner as the legal landowner in the permit. There's two people signed up there, the legal landowner and the tenant, if there is that relationship. And then the tenant said, okay, I'm going to fix it. Built a whole brand new system and stopped discharging. He got rid of liquid waste and didn't need a permit anymore, and we took it away after the term of that permit expired. Right, so there is that too. Right, the horse facility could basically say, okay, I'm calling the sewer district, right? And the sewer said, sure, you can dump your stuff in my sewer. We might require a permit and make them get it and have it for 2 years, and then the sewer takes over, and then we go away.
When you look at like across the agency as a whole, the agency's approach to anything like that, it's educate while we regulate. And so like if we can get you on track where you're in compliance with the regulations through education, that's what we want. That's our goal. Like, we do not need to be issuing notices or several penalties for things when we have a person that's willing to come into compliance with whatever the regulation is.
All right, let's move on to the next one. So nutrient application permit, right? So this is a brand new activity for our agency. And it's a new permit, right? So I guess the very first thing, it applies to CAFOs, right? But CAFOs are not required to get this permit. So there's a real kind of disconnect here. People that will be required to get this permit are agricultural operations, right, that receive manure from a permitted CAFO. The receiver land applies that manure where it's going to in a groundwater management area. Right, so this is very specific to where the application manure is going to take place. And so there's a whole group of CAFOs. Eventually, all CAFOs of any size will have to comply. But CAFO permit compliance for this item, they need the permit number from the person that receives. That's all they need. The CAFO can still export manure according to the way their permits are set up now and whatever they look like in the future. But the new permits will say, hey, for your record keeping, there's one more piece of record you need, and that's the number of this NAP permit. Right,
They're
so
already required to keep something.
they're already required to keep the name of the receiver, the date, the time, and provide the nutrient analysis of material to whoever receives it. But if this receiver happens to want to land apply this material in a groundwater management area, there's 3 in the state right now. That applicator, right, not the CAFO, but the receiver and applicator will have to get this permit. And this permit will basically regulate it will do what the CAFO permit does for a CAFO to a person who isn't a CAFO, right? So this is Farmer John with grow crops and veggies. And he gets 50 tons of manure from the neighboring dairy and he lands applies it and he's in Guatemala. Farmer John gets the NAP permit, right? And then we're gonna have to build that from scratch, right? So we'll have a rack to build this permit. And it can't control air quality. It can't control a lot of things, right? There's no animal welfare. But what it can control is nutrient management, right? So when they receive these nutrients, how are they gonna handle them? How are they gonna apply them at agronomic rate, right? With setbacks from surface water and wells, you know, and then have an irrigation system for irrigating to make sure they're not leaching soluble nutrients and making groundwater worse. Remember, these are all groundwater management areas, so they will all have an irrigation component there too, if they irrigate. Not all people do irrigate them.
You said applicator, is that with the applicator, if they're different from the person whose land is going on, would that better, USO?
So I think I think there's a ton of questions, right? You know, one question we talked about earlier today was, could a fertilizer company say, hey, I'm gonna get a NAP, right? I operate in Hermiston, Oregon, right? And I sell fertilizer here. Well, I'm gonna get a NAP, right? And I'm gonna get manure for these people, then I'm gonna spread it out on all these lands. Can he have the NAP permit, and then apply to 10 different farmers' land under his permit? And so it's kind of like a pesticide, right? There are certain classes of pesticide applicators where you have one applicator who is an employee or an owner of a farm who has 10 employees, and those 10 employees can apply pesticides underneath the owner's pesticide application license, as long as they're supervised and follow these label directions, et cetera, and keep the records. So I don't know, that's an open question. I think when we get in rulemaking, we'll try to run through those scenarios to figure out, well, first we got to say what a NAP is. I think at least the way in my mind is like, let's make the NAP a thing first, and then we'll figure out, well, who needs it, who needs it, and then who can get it, and can one supply it as a dealer, like a dealer distributor NAP, right? And maybe we charge a little more for that one, right? But he services 10 different farms. I don't know.
Right, and and I think when you look at the NAP language, it also only applies to nutrients that you're receiving from a CAFO. So like maybe that scenario doesn't apply. And how do you account for like the irrigation use component if you're a custom applicator kind of scenario? And so, because if you bought a bag of manure compost from your local store and you apply it online, like, do you need it? No, I don't think so. So there's going to be some of those nuances, right?
A further nuance would be like
Right. Historically, because we've had the question about what volume of export right do I need to write down? And we've said, anything smaller than a pickup truckload, right, is good to go without a record. The neighbor comes over once a year, the church comes over and gets a pickup load of manure sulfate for the flower bed, and they do it once a year. We've said that's okay.
So we may need to like actually further clarify or put that in the
in this new permit.
This is what it actually looks like. It's so many pounds and so many tons. So.
And just to clarify, if like you are a fertilizer company who's buying the raw material from the CAFO and then, further processing it, composting it, pelletizing, whatever you want to do, then you would not need to have a NAP permit because you're not the one doing the application. You're then like giving that to a retail store and someone else is doing the application.
That sounds right. I mean,
I think that's right. I think it's something we have to explore and make sure that we're on firm footing there, right?
Right. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, and if a CAFO has like, for example, a chicken CAFO has like 100% export for their waste management plan, and none of those people who are buying that waste are applying it within WAMA, then there would be no NAP permit numbers on that CAFO's records, and that's okay, that's cool.
Right.
Just making sure.
Yes, no, you're perfect on that. So in the subsection, that section 2, that's the CAFO requirement. The CAFO that exports has to have the number if the material's going to be land applied in a Guam. And then we'll just expand on that in the permit itself, right, to describe scenarios, et cetera. Section 5, that's the NAP permit holder, right? Those are requirements for them. And for us, right? Because the permit has to, the word's kind of weird there, must concern, right? I'd say the permit must include, right, the rate of nutrient application, right? And do we want to consider all nutrients or just the CAFO nutrients? And if we're in a groundwater management area, they're all for nitrate and nitrogen species. We probably want to say all sources of nitrogen. And you got to add them up, and you got to figure out an agronomic rate, and you got to put down the source of them, and then how you put them, how you apply them to the cropping system, right? There's various different ways. When you do it, how much water you apply, right? Both irrigation water in almost probably, we're going to talk about that, and or if it's the liquid processed water, that stuff. Per application period, right? Per time period, I think to me means per application. And then there'll be some records, right? We'll have to develop some records that the NAP permittee is going to have to maintain. And then we're going to have to figure out a way to inspect those, right? How we're going to inspect that. What we got a position in this bill who will be this inspector. So once we get the permit on the ground to inspect these activities.
I kind of think about the NAP as like a chain of custody extension to take the liability for proper use of the nutrients from the CAFO to the receiver and continue that to its final utilization. And so it's just that next overlay.
All right, so department can make rules about record keeping, criteria for inspection fees. What happens if you do it, you don't have a permit, right? I mean, what do we do? Right, we talk to you first and we find you second. I mean, we'll have to set all that up. And
what do we charge?
What do we charge? Is there only one size of permit? Is there like an aggregator kind of permit that's a little different than an individual farmer? I don't know, all questions. All right, moving on. Water supply plan. So again, something that we have been doing to some degree, especially on large facilities, that 85 puts into statute, right, and puts a glide path in for facilities of all sizes to require, right? So after July 2025, right, every CAFO facility, right, renewing or coming onto a new permit after that date will need to have a water supply plan. So there's upon signature, new and expanding. After a year, essentially July 24 next year, all the other largest renewing after that date. And the 25 date, all smalls and mediums renewing their permits or becoming a new permit too right after that date. So a water supply plan basically is a list of all of the water that CAFO needs to operate. And so the 3 types of water that they need are generally going to be for irrigation. If you're irrigating crops, you're going to have a water right for that irrigation. If you are watering stock, you're going to have a water right or an exemption, right? And there is currently stock water is exempt with an unlimited amount of use, right? This bill changes that exemption for new facilities and these facilities as they come into the water supply plan requirement. Right, it puts a 12,000 gallon per day cap on stock water. And then the third category of water use is it's termed industrial in water resources nomenclature. And the example, a dairy is a good example, right? When you're washing the milking system, the water to use to wash that requires a water right, requires what's called industrial water. Right? And you can reuse the waste, right? Most of our dairies, the bigger dairies, all of their industrial water, their chiller water, their wash water, their flush water, all that stuff gets reused, right? It's not just a one use and done. It all moves through a system and ends up being reused. All that reused water does not require a water right? As long as it has a water right for the principal initial use, any reuse that's not discharge or wasting right doesn't require right. And so people will have, I think the supply plan could be 1 or 2 pages. It's not going to be a 50-page document. And it's not a huge amount of legalese about the water right. We're going to ask them to provide the water right certificate number. Right, and the well, where is it? If you're pumping out of a well, we need the certificate number, the well number if it has one, right, and where's it located at? And then we're gonna take this document and give it to Water Resources Department, right? They're the people with authority for quantity, and they're gonna look at it. And they're going to confirm, or what's the word we're using here? WRD shall provide a determination of legality, right? So they're gonna provide some determination that, hey, everything they wrote down there is completely legal and they're good to go. Or, no, this water right doesn't allow that use. You can't do that. Or this water right isn't big enough, right? You said you needed 100 gallons a minute and this water rate's only for 50. Right? This water right is for irrigation use only. You can't use an irrigation right for industrial. You can apply for a change of character of use and change the character of some of that water, but that's an administrative process. And so it's going to get into a boatload of water law, right? That I'm not versed in. And so we'll have to have Water Resources on board, right? And they have a primary role in looking at these things and determining the legality, because ultimately the agency's not going to issue a CAFO permit if WRD says the water is not there. And so there could be some basins where a CAFO comes forward and wants to operate, I think regardless of size, right? And says, here's my water supply plan. And the agency that regulates it says, no, it's not legal, and there's no way that you can get water there, right? Or the way you can get it, we won't issue a new water right there in that basin, it's closed. You can transfer an existing right, and here's the list of rights in that basin. You can go talk to these folks, and they all say, no, we won't transfer anything. If there's no water right there, we can't issue it.
Yeah, and it was the statute specific that if you put like, hey, I intend to transfer this use to this use, and it's not a final determination by law of that transfer, it cannot be considered in the water sector. Right. So they would say, no, at this existing time, we're not going to consider that. So that was pretty explicit. The other thing, I don't know if you talk about it later on another slide, but the consumption.
No, let's talk about it here.
Okay, so I think the other component of this is when determining how much water you need and if you have sufficient amounts to operate the CAFO for what you intend to do is animal consumption. The statute directs ODA to create a resource guide that says, dairy cows max consumption is X, and that would be used to calculate total animal numbers. That also relates to any of our current dairies that are operating under CAFOs within the state that it's using the stock water exemption where they're not currently bound by the 12,000 gallons per day. When they go to expand or grow, they have to calculate what's their current use, and they're allotted that. So it's kind of like locking that in for what they're currently operating at, and then they get 12,000 above that for an expansion. So before they need water. So that'll be work that will likely be tapping on OSU for to help us find scientific literature that determine that is.
So part of our role as advisory committee work, right, is going to get some experts together to put together a table of water use by species and purpose, right? So chickens for meat and chickens for eggs are probably going to have different water use amounts. Dairies by bird, dairy animals by breed, of course, by species. Probably by by lactation, what kind of production are they, right? An 80-pound cow is going to drink more than a 60-pound producing cow. So we'll have to put all that science together and figure out what's the number, how do we find numbers so that we can come up with, this is a reasonable, because if somebody comes up and says, hey, my cow drinks 2 ounces a day, right? And that's all I need, and I got this much water. And then as soon as you go away, right, I'm going to turn on the valve. It's got to be realistic.
Sarah King has a question.
Yeah.
I may have just needed a moment to process the thought because I'm trying to make sure that I understand. So because I don't have water rights on my property, but I have 2 horses and 2 cows, and I'm considered a confinement operation. Am I understanding correctly that I am not needing a water right because I'm under the 12,000 gallon exemption and covers that? But if I have a cow that delivers a calf and I'm milking her for my household, and I wash my pail, I need a water rate for that. Am I correct in that process?
I'd say, yeah, I'd say no.
Okay.
I'd say no in that example you gave, Sarah, and here's why. Right, so there is an exemption that 85 doesn't address, right? And that is the industrial water has an exempt use capped at 5,000 gallons a day. So if your milk bucket washing activities are less than 5,000 gallons a day, right? You're
Right.
not getting the water right for that. So I think we can check that one off the list.
Okay, just
On
making
the-
sure.
On the livestock watering, on the drinking water, right? If you added up all the head of livestock that were on your farm or expected to be with new births, et cetera, trading livestock, whatever, you'd have to be below 12,000 gallons a day, right? And what the component of livestock we talked about.
Okay.
In that scenario, I'd say no and no.
Okay, just making sure, because I'm like,
Sure.
I'm producing less than 5 gallons of wash water for my milking system on a daily basis anyway. So just making sure I'm not, missing something that I need all of a sudden a water permit or a water rate in order to use those 5 gallons of water on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think you're good there. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
The industrial is 5,000 per day, right? And the other thing, and we need water resource to clarify this, I'll say it publicly, but I'm not the authority on this, right? Our belief is that water resources will not let you store that exempt water, right? Because the statute said it's for daily use. And so let's say you need 10,000 gallons a week. You wash one day and it's 10,000 gallons on that one day where you wash the whole system. And you're limited to 5,000. Well, so he's going to say, well, can I put up a 10,000 gallon tank, right? And pump 5,000 into it one day and 5,000 into it the next day and then wash my facility on day 3. And the answer is no. We believe the answer is no to that.
And I believe WRD testified to that in one of the earlier discussions around CAFOs about water usage, that storage was not allowed, but they're the answers.
Right. So that'll be something we want to post to them and get a good read on that. Because on irrigation water, there is a storage allowed, right? If you have a well that only produces 1/10 of a CFS, right? You need 3 CFS to run your system. You can store water, right, to build up enough in storage to be able to pump it out at 3 CFS on the one day a week you want to irrigate. But it doesn't sound like that activity is allowed for these other 2.
You think it would be though, because if you do it for one, then you can transfer.
Well,
right to.
Yeah, they'll have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So it's kind of use it or lose it. So.
Yeah, and on that, I don't think there's any use requirement for an exempt use. And again, that would be a WRD question to really clarify, but an irrigation right, if you don't use your irrigation right within once every 5 years, you technically forfeit it. I don't believe that's true on exempt use, but again, because anybody qualifies for an exempt use. You show up and you can build a house and pull 5,000 gallons a day.
Yeah, the sound got kind of distorted there. I had a question kind of along the use it or lose it in a way. Is if I'm allowed 5,000 gallons per day, if I don't use that, I can't then try to use 7,000. Say I use 2,000 gallons on day 1. That doesn't give me any right to those 3,000 leftover gallons on day 2.
Yeah, I think that's right. Again, we'll want WRD to look at that. The other interesting thing, right, that we need WRD to help with is on waste water, right? And so waste is another term that's defined in WRD. And so on a dairy that has a milk chiller, you're taking potable water from a well with a water right or an exemption, that's 5,000 gallons a day, and you're running through your chiller. You're running 4,000 gallons a day through your chiller. You can reclaim the water on the other side of that chiller and use it for stock watering, and it doesn't require a water right. Right, because it's waste at that point. It came out of the ground legally with a water right or an exemption. It's had a primary use, and you reclaimed it and used it for a secondary use or a tertiary. I mean, you put it in your water tank and watered your livestock with it. That doesn't require water right. You watered your lawn with it. You dumped it in your lagoon and irrigated your field. All those volumes are not calculated as part of this for these secondary and tertiary uses. So we could get down to the weeds, right, on, on numbers. The other thing on this, right, is meters. WRD will likely require metering, and either ODA will require it in the CAFO permit, right, or WRD will require it. I don't know what the vehicle will be, but so they'll, for new uses, right, there'll be a meter, and the meter will have to read X or below, right, to be in compliance. And ODA staff may read meters and transfer data to WRD. WRD staff has an annual inspection that they can do for the meter reading activity. And so again, that will be a development question, right, as that goes forward.
And forgive me if I missed something, but on a piece of property, say I have 3 wells, is the usage per day the aggregate of those 3 wells, or can I isolate well output to given bodies of stock and then have 5,000 gallons for off of this well, 5,000 off of 3 wells?
That's a great question. I don't know that we want to try and make a guess. I think we're gonna have to lean on WRD to say what's actually allowed on a per well basis versus a facility basis, and how does that all flesh out?
Right.
No time.
Because in that scenario, people would just start drilling wells, right? Oh, I'm gonna drill 10 wells. I need 50,000, I have 10 wells, 5,000 gallons a day from each straw. That's, all right, can we go to the next one? Stop water exemption, we kind of already talked about this, right? 12,000 gallons a day. This is for new. Right, and it will meter into everybody eventually. Next one. Air quality. So it's new.
Can we, I'm sorry, can we back up, just to make sure I understand, the new 12,000 gallon limit, totally understand that. And then you said eventually it'll meter into everybody. Is that when the water supply plan takes place? Or I thought it was just gonna be new blanket. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, so if you're, again, like, a dairy that's currently operating in Tillamook with 5,000 head, right? They are currently using X amount of exempt stock water.
Right.
That won't go.
So it's that
then.
plus 12,000.
Right,
Yeah.
so it'll eventually go to them if they wanted to expand the operation to add additional dairy cows.
But if you're a existing facility and you never expand.
Right, you're just at
just
what
do
your
your
current
thing.
use is.
Yes, gotcha.
Yeah. I can't remember with the water supply plan, I think they eventually get pulled it in, like what's your current usage, and it gets calculated based off of the animal consumption numbers we need to establish.
But this that sunsets anyway in like 5 years.
Then, right, that is an interesting point, yeah, so the water supply plan requirement, right, sunsets out of 85 in 2 years or 5 years or whatever, there's a sunset date, right? The thought, I think, when that was all generated was by that point, water resources will have done whatever rulemaking or statute. Either legislature will do more statute or WRD will do rulemaking to probably put that in their rule. And so it may go out of 85 by order of operation, it sunsets away. But if it becomes a requirement in there, it will still operationally be the same, I think. All right, so air quality. So ODA does have a bit of a role to play here, right? So DEQ is the state agency that issues air quality permits and is the Clean Air Act authority. ODA is not. The National Air Emissions Monitoring System study is a EPA study, right? On facilities nationwide. Data was collected from a dairy in Washington and from poultry facilities in California. Those are the closest facility stuff where they collected data. EPA is under court order to complete this study and come out with findings, right, in 24 and 25. When that happens, within 180 days of completion of this activity from EPA, right, DEQ, and I'm going to say ODA is along for this ride, right, because we'll be part of the conversation developing the report to the legislature about what EPA is going to do with this study results. Are they going to require a permit? They might. Are they going to say, hey, facilities of this size and bigger need to report your ammonia emissions, your hydrogen sulfide emissions? And so whatever that is, we just have to work with DEQ and put a report together and give that back to the legislature. right? And then figure out, well, what that report, of course, is gonna say, identify the process, right, for developing recommendations to reduce air contaminant emissions by CAFOs. So kind of, I don't know what that'll look like until the report gets done and see where the state wants to go, right? The state can be more restrictive than the feds. Feds may set up a permit requirement. State would at a minimum have to do at least that. State could do additional. Depending on, you know, what the findings are. Next one. I could probably burn a lot of time here, so. Land use. So not ODA because we're not a land use authority, right? But the land use, right? We require a land use compatibility statement for every permit application that comes in or any substantial mod, right? We require land use compatibility to make sure the mod is allowed where they want to do it. Probably either at that time or at some time when they would issue like an ag exempt building permit for a farm to build a capital structure. The county, right, or the city, that whoever has land use authority there could add additional conditions for setbacks, right? That's not ODA. We're not gonna do anything here other than inform an applicant, right, that this might happen. And if you know that what county you want to cite in, it would be good to go talk to them and to tell them what you want to do and see if they'll give you a read on what the requirements they might put on them. Again, this is something that the applicant is going to have to take the onus, right, to go to the land use authority and figure out what needs to happen there. Then once the land use authority tells them, right, if it changes their site plan, right, we would get a new site plan. DEQ and a 1200C permit will get an updated site plan. They may say, hey, well, we want a 100-foot setback right from this road for whatever reason. Then they could have capital structures right there. But it would be under a land use authority by that planning group, not by them. All right, next one. And so we kind of already talked about this. I guess the only thing I'd say, this is the Rules Advisory Committee. If you know anybody that should be on here, please let us know. I'm going to try to put together something in writing next week and send it out to a bunch of people I know, including this group. I'd like to get it set up by the end of this month. So we're on a pretty aggressive timeline. And then we'll need to start drafting, right, and having documents for this group to review. So I anticipate we could have several meetings, right? This will be independent of the advisory committee meetings, right? We have one more scheduled for October. Be nice if we were done with our work by October. We might be done by October, but so if anybody that does raise your hand, just know, right, you're going to be getting stuff from us, and we're going to be asked to review and comment. And then we'll set up meetings like virtually and or in person to review. Maybe a couple, 3, maybe 5 or 10. It's hard to know, right, till we get going on that. Other agencies may have their own rulemaking, WRD, DEQ. We'll do our best to stay up to date on that, let you know if you want to participate in their what they're doing to implement 85. And as Isaac said to start with, right, it's going to take some time to do this. And so we're not going to be able to make decisions on some activities until we get some of this stuff out of that. So that's kind of what's going on here. And that's the last thing I have on that. Sorry, we went way over on time, but appreciate the question.
Yeah, thank you for answering the question.
Yeah. It's you know, our program is a spider web anyway, right? This adds another web on top of the web. So all right, so that next item is the general permit update. But right, because of 85, we're going to have to put these, first we have to do the rules, then we will put those things into the new permit, both general NPDS and WPCF and individual NPDS and WPCF permits. Right, the order of those will be the general NPDS permit first, and then a few individual NPDS permits second. And then the WPCF permit doesn't expire until 25, so we actually have a little bit of time on that one. And there's only one individual WPCF statewide. So, but anyway, the work that we do, right, in those rules will just be verbatim copied into the permit, right? These new definitions the requirements for these facilities, right, as they move forward, as they expand, etc. All of these permits will have to go to notice, right? We've already noticed the MPDS general permit one time, a little over a year ago. It will have to go back to notice again, right? So it won't start from scratch. It will be probably everything we had in there when we last took it out, plus these new things. Right, so it will go back to notice, people have, they'll be hearing, people will have a chance to get comments on the permit itself. And then repeat that times through. All right, so I'm just gonna skip program updates, Christy, unless you had anything really burning on.
I don't.
I mean, just a lot of work going on. Oh, I guess one other thing, we are gonna hire 2 positions, right, to staff up for this 85 work. I think we will probably advertise in a month or 2, right? They can't come on board, I think, till October. We're gonna hire the permit writer first to get that NAP permit written, right, and those rules through for that, which will kind of be the second rules that we'll work on. And then we're gonna hire an inspector, I'm gonna guess around the first of the year. And the inspector will focus on NAP things first, but also provide capacity for other kind of inspection activities or facilities coming on board or consultations. I mean, there's more work here. And so we need more bodies to get the work done. Partner updates, any of those? And hey, Nick, are you on the call? He thought he might not be able to make, I have a written update from him I'll give, but I'll let folks in person go first.
Yeah, I don't think he's there.
Any updates from any partners? Any partners not participating you'd like to see participating? I can send them a reminder letter. NRCS, conservation districts, watershed councils, other livestock groups. If you think of any, yeah, just let me know. I did get an update from Nick. So Nick is with EPA. He's the Region 10 Ag Advisor out of Boise. He used to be EPA's Region 10 CAFO program person. And so his update is about what's called the Sackett case. This was a Waters of the U.S. case. The Sacketts are a couple in Idaho that wanted to build a house in a wetland, and the jurisdictional Corps of Engineers folks said, no, you can't do that because it's a water of the U.S. And well, they didn't say you can't do it. You can do it, but you got to have a permit first. And they challenged it, went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, ruled in Sackett's favor and basically said the waters of the United States definition is too broad, and basically struck a bunch of it and remanded a bunch more back to EPA. So these are updates, that Nick gave me from EPA headquarters, right? I was just going to read them verbatim. He said, EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, right, are committed to following the science and following the law as we implement Clean Water Act. Parts of the 2023 WOTUS rule, Waters of the United States, is WOTUS, are inconsistent with the recent Sackett decision from the Supreme Court. Therefore, the agency plans to surgically amend key aspects of the regulatory text to conform it with the court's decision. Agencies believe it's in the public interest to clarify the applicable regulatory regime as soon as possible. And once this rule is final, EPA and the Army Corps will host discussions with stakeholders with the goal of understanding any implementation related questions remaining after the final rule and in light of the Sackett decision. I'm guessing this kind of leaves out, is there a public participation option? I think that there is, but I think when EPA proposes a rule for the Federal Register, there's a public, opportunity to comment, right? But that was his update from headquarters. The way Oregon looks at this is the same way the state of Washington looks at WOTUS for our program, because our state has a definition called Waters of the State of Oregon that are extremely inclusive. Waters of the state really don't come into waters of the U.S. right don't come into the play for us. right? Some of our facilities are on federal permits, right, that protect them against Clean Water Act issues for waters of the US. And others of ours are on a state permit that would not protect them if there was a waters of the US discharge. Right, so some by choice and some by, when I live in the desert and there's no water, I'll take my chance. Anyway, we'll just kind of follow along with this, right? We don't, it's not gonna affect, we believe, any of our permits or programs at this point. And with the waters of the state definition, we just go with that in our permit too. So we require any facility defined as an Oregon CAFO to be permitted, as well as any facilities the feds require to be permitted. All have to have a permitted already. All right, public comment, any public comment? Let's go to the people on the virtual meeting. Anybody out there with public comment?
They're all in person. Well, the two people that are signed up are just in person.
Last call for anybody on the virtual meeting that wants to make comment. All right, anybody in the room would like to make comment?
We have Alice Morrison. You can go first. Right, if you want.
I've made many comments during this. To reintroduce myself for the record, my name is Alice Morrison. I'm with Friends of Family Farmers. We're a nonprofit organization that serves over 1,600 farmers across the state, including many CAFO permit holders and small raw dairies. Some of which, have CAFO permits, some don't, and they're grappling with the reality of having to fall into a new category for the first time. And I think that we've had many meetings about this issue, and my constituents are still extremely worried about this program, and they don't feel like there's been enough clear guidance on whether or not they fall into one category or another. It was great to hear that there is a standard of, like, if you are in a dry waste system, then that medium tier is when you trigger a CAFO permit, because as I saw it before this meeting, from what I learned from you all before, is like this confinement question could be, like, if we chose to, could be applied very, very broadly. And that created a lot of confusion for the folks that I work for. And I am glad to hear that there is some kind of generally understood size where that triggers. I would love to see a rulemaking process where we can put that in rules so everyone knows that that's the standard. I also, that our organization fundamentally believes that small farms and large farms have to be regulated differently because of the potential to do harm with mismanaged waste. When that happens, we understand there is a very high rate of compliance with the current statute, although there's new statute now. And we still hold that a full CAFO permit is inappropriate for someone with 1 or 2 cows, and feel that we would like the program and the agency to reconsider this in light of the capacity issues that are coming up with the implementation of 85. It doesn't seem to us that there's capacity to fully implement everything that's going on at this moment. And we feel that you should reconsider the small dairy program, especially that date of January 1st for to move out of the education phase into a regulatory phase, given all of the activity that has to happen with 85 and all of the capacity that's being drawn in that direction. I believe I've covered all of my other comments in my multitude of questions. Thank you for including me.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, the next person we have is Christine Anderson.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Christine Anderson. I've spoken before. I'm just a small dairy in McMinnville. When we came out to the event, we hosted there and gave presentation and answered questions. But I have communications with a lot of these smaller dairies, and I feel that a lot of questions and concerns, some of which I also have. So, back in there's been some inconsistencies that maybe weren't fully hashed out when the program begun, such as the requirement that there was gonna be an exemption if you didn't sell the milk and it stayed on site, which created some confusion among people that I was working with. And I guess my concerns are that it seems to be a matter of opinion rather than things that are defined and based on standards and, something that with your rulemaking process that is kind of landing on these small producers in a way that makes it complicated because there was no ability to necessarily participate in that, kind of activity. And my other concern really comes down to, the fact that I don't see the resources available. So I personally, in April, the week after the last CAFO meeting, spoke with WIM and, reached out to my, inspector and asked for an educational review, and I still have yet to hear back from that individual. I sent out follow-up emails when I talked about it in June. So we're 3 months going on me not getting a response back for too much work on that inspector. So I don't know if that's related to me personally in my region or if it's an agency-wide factor, but I just have concerns over regulation of the small guys when the resources are just not there. In my own speaking with these types of producers, it seems that guys that have 2 or 3 cows or one or milking and home production don't obviously have CAFO permits currently, but the guys that have 10 cows are all currently under the umbrella of sort of a CAFO. So again, just concerns on the January 1st date. It's going to take me 3 months to get, back on an education on my luck. I have all the paperwork. I'm ready to do this, and I have questions about my facility specifically, which can't be answered from just reading through current statute. And I believe that a rulemaking process for if we're going to really incorporate those small farms into this type of program, that it has to be based on something that can not just be observed by someone standing there, because it's just really hard to read it. So,
That was all we had
Anybody else?
on my list.
All right, industry updates. Anybody updates? Anybody on the video with the industry updates?
Can I ask a question about something we haven't talked about at all today?
Sure.
Actually, it's not related to I was gonna ask about the meat inspection infrastructure grant, if you all knew if and when, if there were going to be any changes made to that program before it goes forward, because I know it's amazing, we got more money, I'm so excited. Because I have some folks who are curious if like ODA inspected chicken facilities would be eligible under that, because they weren't last time.
That's a good question. I don't know. I think I'd have to connect back with Rusty or Jess to get you an answer, but we can do that.
I'll reach out to them too, but I just wondered if you knew.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much farther they've gotten down the road of reassessing now that they have additional funds too about we need to make some changes or how do we make changes. So,
Yeah, I just got a very pointed question from someone who operates one of those state inspected chicken processing facilities. And he said, will I be eligible? And I said, I don't know. I'll try to find out.
Bit of a side note on the first state meat grant person was the place called the Meeting House up in Hillsborough, right? And one of the ways that they chose to handle all their waste system was a CAFO permit. Right, so they're at their livestock, because there's 2 facilities, right? Their refeed cow facility in town, and then their grow processing facility out in the country, out on a farm.
Yeah.
And so the farm site has a CAFO permit. That's how they handle all their slaughter waste and composting and everything.
Yeah, the person who asked me the question is actually Jeff Scott from Helvetia, which is like right down the road.
Okay.
Place and has a CAFO.
Okay.
Closing the loop.
Yeah. Other questions, comments, updates? World's going around. All right, well, thank you all. I'll try to send out something in writing next week on invitations for the RAC. Please consider that pretty rapidly, right, and get that back to us so we can try to convene kind of the first, an actual meeting, right, to kind of scope it and then start looking at stuff. Yeah, thank you all. We can, yeah.
Just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Outsourced my attendance. It goes